Welcome, welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So today, of course, we're in the Torah Temimah, and we're back in Genesis, working our way through and coming actually to the end of Parsha Lech Lecha, the third Parsha of the Torah. And you notice that I believe you can see over here, right? These are my bookmarks. Tell me if you can see them. I'm just curious. But these are my bookmarks, and you'll see that there's a reason I have them there because I'm going to be jumping a little bit, and I'm hoping to save a little time in terms of turning up pages, etc. So that's why it's there. So going on with the text, there's a lot more text for us to do. The previous verse here, chapter 17. Is that God has just told Abraham, he's now Abraham, no longer Abram, that Sarai, right? Sarai, his wife, is now going to be called Sarah. But the way it's structured in the Hebrew, and we kind of pulled this out, is that in a sense, she was always a Sarah. That her name was Sarah. And it's more, and I think Torah T'mimah tries to bring this out, is that the reason she was called Sarai which Sarai means my princess, right? My princess. And Sarah simply means a princess. Is that again, what we're going to see, there's going to be something happening here. Uverachti ota, and I shall bless her. V'gam natati mimena lacha ben, and indeed I will give give from her to you a son. Uverachtiha, and again, look at this, verachtiha, I shall bless her. V'haita legoyim, and she will become nations. Malchei amim mimena yu, kings of nations will come from her, will be from her. So there's the idea of barach. What exactly when blessed? Blessing, I believe, essentially has to do with numerous, being, the amount of quantity that the blessing has to do, and not simply quality, which sometimes I think we simply associate with it. And we're going to keep going on, right? So, Vayipol Avraham al panav vayitzchak. Abraham fell on his face and he laughed. Right here, he laughed because of joy. Right, Vayomer belibo, and he said in his heart, literally meant he was thinking. Right, he thought. Halaven me'ashana yivaled. Can a son be born to someone who is, or sorry, can someone be born, ben me'ashana, to someone who is 100 years old? So that's just simply the way you say your age in Hebrew. You say, Ani ben shivim, I am 70 years old, and you use this term ben, right? I'm the son of 70 years. Ben. Ve'im Sarah, right? And as far as Sarah is concerned, is it possible, Habat tishim shana teled, that a woman of 90 years can give birth? So we know, we're very familiar for the most part, if you have some familiarity with the stories in Genesis, that about Sarah laughing, right? But there's a difference between Abraham's laughing here and Sarah's laughing later on, right? Even though here, Abraham, they're both expressing a level of surprise, right, and disbelief that this is possible. In other words, you know, this is not part of nature, right? But here Abraham is laughing at joy at the thought of this happening. So it's not so much disbelief here, but the joy of his thinking that this can actually happen. He's so happy. Whereas in the case of Sarah, it is more a case seriously of disbelief, of not believing this would actually happen. And that's why the reaction in that story regarding Sarah is different from the reaction here, because here the laughter is coming from joy. And we do know that laughter, we laugh for different reasons. We can laugh out of fear, we can laugh out of joy, we can laugh out of anger. Laughter is simply a very deep expression coming from the innermost parts of the core of our souls. Going on. Vayome Avraham ela Elohim, and Abraham said to God, Lu Yishmael yichle lefanecha, were it possible for Yishmael to live before you. Beautiful, right? That he, even though, right, that the thing he wanted more than anything else was for him and Sarah to be able to have a child. And he knows the reason he has Ishmael is because they weren't able to do it. And he still loves Ishmael. And I love the fact that the Torah still has that in here, that it still records a notion that Ishmael is also beloved of Abraham. And not only that, we're going to see, Vayomer Elohim, right? So God responds, right? Say, Aval Sarah ishtacha yoledet lecha ben. He says, however, Sarah, your wife, will give birth for you a son, v'karata, and you shall call his name Yitzchak, v'hakimoti et briti ito, and I shall establish my covenant with him, levit olam, as an eternal, perpetual covenant, lazaro acharav, for his seed following him, Yishmael, and regarding Yishmael, shematicha, I have heard you. And here, of course, hearing means I accept what you're asking, right? Hine berachti oto, indeed, I will bless him. Vehifreti oto, and I will make him numerous, right? Vehirbeti oto ma'odsa. Hifreti meaning I will make him fruitful, right? I will make him fruitful, and I will make hirbeti oto ba'od ma'od, and I will make him exceedingly numerous. Shneim asar nesiim yolid, he will give birth to 12 princes or rulers, unetativ legoy gadol, and I will make him into a great, great nation. Et Brit Akim et Yitzchak. So it says, however, my covenant I will establish with Isaac. Asher teled lecha Sarah, right, whom Sarah will bear, lemoed hazeh, at this time, bashana ha'acheret, in the next year. Vaychal ledaber ito, and he ended speaking with him, Vayal Elohim me'al Abraham, and the Lord went up from Abraham. Vayikach Abraham et Yishmael beno, and Abraham took his son Yishmael, ve'et kol yedidei beito, and all those born of his household, ve'et kol miknat kaspo, and all of that he had purchased, in other words, people he had purchased as slaves, kol zachar, all males, ba'anshe Bnei Avraham, all the males of the people of Abraham's household, vayamol et pesar olatam, and he circumcised the flesh of their foreskins, be'etzem hayom hazeh, on that very self-same day, ka'asher diber ito Elohim, just as God had spoken to him. And of course, this is a demonstration of Abraham's love for God, the fact that he did it that self-same day, because part of demonstrating love, when the person you love or claim to love asks something of you, doing it as soon as possible is an expression of deep love. So, going on. Okay. Let's see. Now we do have so we do have a Torah Temimah here, right here. This is on verse 21. Ve'et Brit Akim, I will establish my covenant. Excuse me 1 second here. Ve'et Brit Akim, and I will establish my covenant. It's none. So Tanan is a word that introduces a Mishnah, right? A statement, a source to be found in the Mishnah. It is taught to us. Rabbi Yishmael Omer. So I don't know if there's any irony in the fact that the rabbi we're talking about has the name of Yishmael. He is a great, great rabbi, and he is to some extent an interlocutor of Rabbi Akiva. Right? So Rabbi, they're, I believe, contemporaries. So Rabbi Yishmael Omer, Dola Mila, the circumcision is great. Why? Shenichritu aleha, because in regards to it, they were established, right? Shlosh, here we go. Esrei Bitot. There are 13 covenants established with the act of circumcision. The Ezohen, and what are we referring to? Amar Rabbi Yochanan, said Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan is a much later sage. He is a major player in the Gemara. I believe that the Talmud Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud, is credited to his editorship, but he plays a great role also in the Gemara of the Babylonian Talmud. So, said Rabbi Yochanan, Min bayom hahu. In other words, we find these 13 covenants, and what we're really saying is that the word covenant is mentioned 13 times, that it's repeated this many times, right? So, min bayom hahu karat Hashem et Avraham Brit, from the statement that it says, on that day, the Lord established a covenant with Abraham, up to the point where it says, and we're being given the reference here. This is chapter, looks like chapter 15, verse 18. We'll check and see. I'm going to go back there and see if I can find it. So from that sentence, to the sentence, to the point, for et Brit Akim et Yitzchak, and I will establish my covenant with Yitzchak. And we see that it is, in fact, in the Talmud Yerushalmi, in Tractate Nedarim Chapter 3, Halacha. Now let's go back and see if we can find this statement by Yomahu Karat. Okay, let's see. That's why I have this here. Let's see where we're here. Okay, let's see. It says 15 we said. See, no, this is not the place. Let's go here. Let's see. Nope, that's not the place either. Let's see here. Well, here it is. I will give my covenant, but I have to find the place by Yom Hahu. That's the part, right? That's what it was saying. So find it. Now I'm having, okay, so it said, right, when we looked at it, got back here, this is where it was. So he was saying that it was chapter, let's go back here. So Tet Vav is chapter 15, verse 18. So let me see, that seems very far back, but let me see. Let's go back, chapter 15. Let's see where that is. That's chapter 15. Let's keep here. Here it is. There it is. There's the verse.
Welcome.
Okay.
Okay.
So I do not know why I'm getting that particular little piece. But anyway, hopefully it's still recording and doing what it needs to do. But here it is, Bayomahu Karat Hashem et Avram Brit. So there's chapter 15, verse 10. So there's that word, Brit. Right? Let me go down to here. Hopefully I can get it right there. Okay, so all right, so there we go. That's that place.
Right? Welcome.
So I have no idea why it's repeating.
Welcome. Baruch atah. Welcome. Baruch. Welcome.
Interesting. Let me keep going. Try and see what I can do here. Okay. All right. So that place, et Brit Akim et Yitzchak, and that verse we just had. So now let's take a look at Torah T'mimah. V'harambam, this is Maimonides, of course, right? But Maimonides, Bepiresh HaMishnayot, when he was explaining the Mishnah, he has, at a very young age, I think he was like 18, when he wrote an interpretation or an explanation of the Mishnah. And he wrote it, I believe, in Judeo-Arabic, right? But we have it translated into Hebrew. Kan, right here, in other words, where he talks about this particular place. In other words, possibly in Nedarim, right? Somewhere, if it may be in his Mishnah in Nedarim, chapter 3, right? And the Mishnah is divided into these Mishnayot. So I did not look it up. They're true confessions, right? Okay. So that's in one place. Uvechiburo, and in his composition, referring here to the Mishneh Torah, Sof Hilchot Milah. So he has it divided, of course, into major halachic subjects. And in the chapter he has, or the section he has, discussing the laws of Milah, of circumcision, Moneh, he actually counts, min pasuk, he counts from the verse Ve'etna Briti, right? So that's verse 2. Let's take a quick look here, just for the sake. Let's see if it is. There it is. Well, what do you know? Ve'etna Briti. So that's in chapter 17. So clearly, Rabbi Yishmael goes further back. He happens to count it from verse 2. And of course, this is Torah Temimah is dealing with this sort of interesting difference, right? Okay, so let's find the place. Let's see if I really can go. No, that's all right. Excuse my talking to myself. Right. V'tzarich lomar, and we have to say, b'ta'amo, regarding his reason for counting the way he does, shelo mana min bayom hahu, he does not count from the verse that Rabbi Yishmael said, right? On that day, Karat Hashem Brit et Avram. The reason he doesn't, right, that it says, on that day the Lord established a covenant with Abraham. Why? Mishum de'oto pasuk, because that particular verse, lo aire binyan milah, because it doesn't deal with the subject of circumcision. Back there in chapter 15, right, it isn't talking about that. It is simply there, it's talking about the story of, the where he has to send Ishmael away, etc., and how is the covenant that God has made with Abraham is going to go through Isaac, right? And it talks about establishing a covenant, but it's not talking about circumcision. And that's why the Rambam doesn't want to use that verse, because we're talking about a covenant established in connection with the circumcision. That was what we were talking about. V'gam lefize, and also, according to this, yeh yud daled britot. And he says, however, we still have 14 times where we have this word Brit being mentioned, right? I think he's saying that if we count that earlier verse, right, that's another reason. If we count that earlier verse, we don't have 13 covenants. We got 14 covenants, which of course raises other kinds of questions because, why would this quote from Rabbi Yishmael have 14 covenants when he says 13? So there's some perplexity here. Uvecholze, he says, however, even though we can explain Maimonides' rationale, tzarich iyun, we still need to look carefully into this. Sheshina miseder HaYerushalmi, right? This, for a later rabbi like Maimonides, as fabulous as he was and brilliant, for him to disagree with the Yerushalmi, this is not a small thing, right? This is a major upset. Okay, so. Uladat HaYerushalmi. So let's take a look, he's saying, more carefully. Why does the Yerushalmi do what it's doing? Tzarich lomar. So we have to say that the reason the Yerushalmi counts from that earlier passage, the lo manab, that he doesn't count et briti hefer. He doesn't count the verse, right? That is verse 14 in chapter 17, where it talks about the word Brit, but it says, my covenant he has annulled. Why? Mipnei shehu nismach ala lashon Brit hakodem. Why? Torah T'mimah says, it says because that reference to that covenant is actually referring to the word covenant prior to it in the sentence. And that's why Yerushalmi doesn't count that sentence. He thinks that's the reason. So Yerushalmi, counting from chapter 15 and that particular verse, still has 13 covenants, right? Veda. So now we're reflecting on this. And no, understand, ki b'midrash rabbah, this is, I believe, right? No, it's b'midbar rabbah. Right, it's in the midrash called midrash rabbah for the word for the book Bamidbar, for the book of Numbers. Midrash rabbah is organized according to the 5 books of the Torah and the 5 Megillot. That's midrash rabbah. But Parshat Naso, that's how I know that it's not Bereshit rabbah. It's for sure Bamidbar rabbah. Very similar words, right? Darish HaPasuk, right? He explains, he interprets that verse, Kaf Achat Asara Zahav, that it's referring to Parshat Naso, talks about the dedication gifts of the priests to the tabernacle on the day it was dedicated, and how each priest each prince of the tribe, head of each of the tribes, each brought a gift, and they brought exactly the same gifts, and it lists and repeats every time the gifts they brought, and it says a ladle, right? A ladle, asara zahav, of, I imagine, 10 shekels of gold. And in the Midrash Rabbah, it says that the symbolism of that kaf achat, that ladle, kaf, of course, is also a word for hand, right? Keneged eser britot, that eser, asara zahav, the 10 shekels of gold, is it corresponds to the 10 covenants, ha'amorot b'parshat milah, that are stated in the chapter dealing with circumcision. Wow. Well, this is what Torah Temimah is saying. Vahu pela. This is incredible. V'tzarich lomar. And so we have to say, Delo chashiv rak hapsukim shebahem niskar lashon rit. And so we have to say that Midrash Rabbah only takes into account those verses, right? Those verses where the word Brit itself is mentioned. Just the word Brit, not Briti perhaps, and not other versions, but simply the word Brit. And in fact, if we go through that, I'm not going to do it, but if you actually look in that chapter to those verses, you'll see that they are only 10 times it's mentioned. V'yein b'tosafot yontif. He says further look at, this is a commentary on the Mishnah, right? It's a very sophisticated analysis of the Mishnah by Yom Tov Lipman Heller. Let's see, Perek Gimel, that would be chapter 3, Mishnah Yud Aleph, the 11th Mishnah, the Nedarim in the tractate Nedarim.
Recording in progress.
So we're going to stop right there. And I thank you. And I'm going to stop the share and see if they're, well, you're still here. Thank you. Okay. Morris?
I had a question.
I had a feeling. Yes.
Well, no, this is not.
No. Go for it.
We were just studying Vayikra.
Yes.
We were going through all the rules about ejaculation,
Right.
Seminal
emissions. Yes.
Seminal emission.
Yes.
And now we're in Lech.
Right.
Why? Why are we jumping from
a good, very good question. So I started off by doing Rashi on the Torah, and the way I had this organized was to do each week's parsha and do the Rashi on each week's parsha, And so, of course, we didn't get through all the Rashis of the entire Pasha in a week. I've been doing this, of course, for years now. And in the course of those years, we've eventually come to the end of the Parsha and the Rashis. Okay. Somewhere in the middle of all of this, also way back, I had decided that since the text I'm using is in fact Torah T'mimah, that I wanted to introduce my students to Torah T'mimah and to give them a sense of how Rashi handles it and how Torah T'mimah handles the interpretations. So for a while, we were taking Sunday morning and doing Torah T'mimah. And there, I wanted to just go Keseder. In other words, I had a different organizing principle, and that is to start with Bereshit, to start with the very first verse in Genesis, and then just proceed verse by verse, chapter by chapter through the Torah. So this is where we are now. And then at a certain point, as we were coming to weeks where we had actually done all the Rashis of the Parsha, so I still wanted to do something that morning. And so we went back to Torah T'mimah, which is what we're doing now. So that's why we had come to the end of Acharei Mot Kedoshim, that is the Parsha for this coming week. But we finished up Kedoshim. We'd almost finished Kedoshim last year, but we hadn't. So we finished it up this time, yesterday. And now today, and for the rest of the week, I'm going to be working slowly through Lech Lecha and in Torah Temimah.
Okay.
I hope that made sense. It was a long answer to a very good question.
Okay. Good.
Okay.
So
So
then
I hope you
following
enjoyed.
week we'll be doing the next week's parsha.
Yes, if we haven't done it all already. I have recordings. I have a site on YouTube. You can look it up on that YouTube website, and you can find all the previous, recordings. They're all there.
Okay.
So I do not remember offhand whether I completed Emor. Quite probably not. So we'll be in Parshat Emor unless we've already completed all the Rashis on it.
Got it.
We could spend quite a number of lifetimes just on these particular.
I understand.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Well, let me get off the record. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording.